The collection agent kicked over my father's memorial tablet before anyone could stop him. The sharp crack echoed through the silent apartment. Ashes scattered across the floor. Incense snapped in half. My mother-in-law covered her mouth with both hands, letting out a shrill cry. "What are you doing? This is a funeral." The man in the black suit didn't even look at her. "I'm collecting collateral." He unfolded a thick stack of contracts and slapped them onto the memorial table. 7 overdue loans. Personal guarantees signed by Mr. Ethan Cole. Every face turned toward me. My wife, Evelyn, stood beside the mourning guests, her eyes swollen from crying. Yet the first thing she did wasn't protect me. She whispered, "Ethan, just sign one more extension. One more." The same words. They had followed me through my entire previous life. One more loan. One more guarantee. One more sacrifice. Until my own funeral had no one left to pay for it. I stared at the contracts without touching them. The paper smelled strangely familiar. The expensive ink. The lender's red seal. The date. Exactly the same. Every line was exactly where I remembered it, because I had already watched this day destroy my life once. The room around me suddenly felt distant. The crying. The whispers. The smell of incense. Everything blurred into the memory of another ending. I remembered collapsing inside my office after working 72 hours without sleep. I remembered doctors shouting. The heart monitor's endless alarm. Then darkness. When I opened my eyes again, I wasn't in a hospital. I was standing in front of my father-in-law's coffin. Back at the beginning. Given a second life. Given one impossible chance to make a different decision. The collection agent tapped the contract impatiently. "Mr. Cole." I lowered my eyes to the final page. My signature space waited at the bottom. Last time, I signed without reading. 3 years later, I carried over $4 million of debt that had never belonged to me. This time, I pushed the folder back. "I won't sign." The room froze. Even the collection agent looked surprised. "What?" I said no. Evelyn hurried toward me. Her fingers tightened around my sleeve. "My brother only needs a little more time." A little more time. Jason had needed a little more time for 8 years. Every failed restaurant. Every luxury car. Every gambling debt. Every fake investment. Always one more chance. Always my money. Always my responsibility. I gently removed Evelyn's hand. "He borrowed it. He'll pay it back." "No, you don't know that." "I do." The words escaped before I could stop them. She frowned. "What do you mean?" I looked into her confused eyes. I couldn't tell her I had already lived through her brother's betrayal. Couldn't explain how I'd watched him flee overseas with millions while I stayed behind facing lawsuits alone. Couldn't tell her I knew exactly how every promise ended. The collection agent cleared his throat. "So you're refusing?" "I am." My father-in-law slammed his cane against the floor. "Unbelievable." His voice shook with rage. "My son made mistakes, but family helps family." I met his gaze calmly. Family also takes responsibility for its own choices. "You marry my daughter." "I married Evelyn." I paused. "I didn't marry your debts." Gasps filled the apartment. An elderly aunt muttered, "How heartless." Another relative shook his head. "Money really changes people." I almost laughed. Money hadn't changed me. Memory had. The collection agent gathered the unsigned contracts. "In that case, we'll begin legal recovery against the original borrower." He left. The apartment became painfully quiet. Evelyn stared at me as though I'd become someone else. "You're scaring me." "I know. What happened to you?" I looked toward my late father-in-law's portrait. In my previous life, I'd stood in this exact place promising to protect everyone. Today, I finally understood that protecting people from the consequences of their own choices wasn't love. It was permission. Before anyone could speak again, my phone vibrated. A notification from my company's internal banking system appeared across the screen. "Urgent security alert. Someone has requested emergency access to your corporate credit line." My heartbeat slowed. Exactly 3 hours earlier than last time, someone had already started reaching for the money behind my back. I quietly locked the screen. No one noticed, except one person. Across the room, Jason had finally arrived. He wasn't dressed for a funeral. He wore an expensive designer jacket. A new watch gleamed on his wrist. His eyes met mine for only a second. Then he smiled. It was the same confident smile I'd watched disappear the night he boarded a flight and abandoned us all. Only this time, I smiled back. Not because I forgave him, because for the first time, I wasn't walking into the trap. Jason strode into the apartment as if he owned the room. He didn't bow before his father's portrait. He didn't light incense. Instead, he pulled off his sunglasses and frowned at the tense silence. What happened? No one answered. Evelyn looked toward me, then away again. My mother-in-law wiped her tears and forced a weak smile. It's nothing. Jason glanced at the stack of unsigned documents the collection agent had left behind before taking the originals. His expression hardened almost imperceptibly. They came already? Father-in-law nodded grimly. They did. And his gaze shifted to me. Ethan refused. The room held its breath. Jason laughed. Not loudly. Just enough to make it clear he thought the situation absurd. Brother, you're joking, right? I didn't respond. He walked closer, lowering his voice as if we were sharing a private conversation. You know these lenders aren't patient. I do. They'll seize everything. They'll seize what belongs to the borrower. His smile faded. You've never talked like this before. People change. He searched my face, trying to read something that wasn't there. In my previous life, this was the moment he wrapped an arm around my shoulder and began the performance. He would apologize, promise to sell assets, swear he had investors waiting. By midnight, I would sign. By sunrise, the money would be gone. Today, I simply waited. Sure enough, he sighed dramatically. I messed up. No one spoke. I know everyone is disappointed. His voice cracked with practiced emotion. But this investment is different. I almost admired his consistency. Even after getting a second chance, some people remained exactly who they had always been. Jason reached into his bag and pulled out a glossy presentation folder. I found a logistics project. Once it launches, I can repay every dollar. He slid the folder toward me. Just tell me this last time. I didn't open it. Instead, I asked quietly, how much have you already invested? His answer came too quickly. Everything I had. A lie. I remembered selling my apartment to rescue this so-called logistics project. Months later, investigators discovered there had never been a warehouse, never been shipping contracts, never even been registered land. The company existed only on paper. I looked at the folder, then back at Jason. Who introduced you to this investment? A flicker crossed his face. My friend. Name. He hesitated. The room noticed. Why does that matter? It matters because you can't answer. His jaw tightened. Father-in-law stepped between us. Ethan, enough questioning. My son is trying. I nodded slowly. That's exactly the problem. Jason's expression darkened. What are you implying? I'm saying effort and honesty aren't the same thing. For the first time, genuine anger flashed across his face. Evelyn, are you hearing this? She looked trapped between us. Ethan, her voice trembled. Can we just go home and talk? I looked at her for a long moment. In my previous life, I would have followed. She would cry. I would surrender. Tonight, I understood that every private conversation ended with another sacrifice hidden from everyone else. No. The single word echoed through the apartment. I'll stay a little longer. Her shoulders slumped. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. At that exact moment, my phone vibrated again. This time, it wasn't a notification. It was a call from my company's chief financial officer. I stepped onto the apartment balcony and answered. Ethan, he said urgently, someone claiming to represent your wife just requested authorization to use the corporate credit facility as collateral for a private refinancing deal. Cold rain drifted onto my hands. I closed my eyes. It had begun even sooner than I remembered. Did anyone approve it? I asked. No. Good. There's one more thing. His voice lowered. The application includes a forged digital authorization using your credentials. I opened my eyes. Across the balcony door, I could see Jason inside the apartment. He wasn't looking at the memorial portrait anymore. He was watching me. And when our eyes met through the rain-speckled glass, he slowly put his phone into his pocket, as if he already knew exactly who had answered that call. The rain blurred the balcony glass, but it couldn't blur the look in Jason's eyes. He knew. Not everything, but enough to realize that something had changed. I ended the call with my CFO. Freeze every corporate credit line, I said. Require my in-person approval for every transaction over $5,000. There was a brief silence. Is something wrong? Someone tried to borrow against my company. I'll handle it immediately. And don't tell anyone. Understood. The line went dead. I slipped my phone into my pocket and stood beneath the cold rain for another few seconds. In my previous life, I had never made this call. By tomorrow morning, the forged authorization would have gone through. Within 2 weeks, my company would be tied to another $1.8 million in private debt. Within 6 months, creditors would be sitting in my office. Within 3 years, everything would be gone. Not this time. I walked back inside. The apartment had grown quieter. Relatives whispered among themselves while pretending not to stare. Jason was smiling again. Too quickly. Too confidently. Ethan, he said warmly, let's grab dinner tomorrow. Just the two of us. I looked at him. No. His smile stiffened. You don't even know what I wanted to discuss. I don't need to. A faint crease appeared between his brows. Father-in-law frowned. He's your brother. He's Evelyn's brother. The correction landed heavily. Mother-in-law burst into tears. Have we done something so terrible that you won't even eat with us? For a moment, the guilt returned. It always began like this. Not anger, not threats, tears, disappointment. The quiet implication that I was selfish for protecting myself. In my previous life, those tears had controlled every decision I made. Now, they only reminded me how many times I'd ignored my own. I bowed respectfully toward my late father-in-law's portrait. I'm leaving. Evelyn hurried after me. The elevator doors closed before anyone else could follow. The silence inside the elevator felt heavier than the funeral upstairs. She stared at the floor. You embarrassed my family. I refused a loan. You humiliated my brother. He humiliated himself. She shook her head. You've become cold. No. I watched the floor numbers slowly descend. I've become someone who finally understands the difference between kindness and enabling. She didn't answer. When we reached the parking garage, she stopped walking. Tell me the truth. I am. No. She looked directly into my eyes. What happened to you? I almost told her. About the second life. About my death. About watching her divide my belongings before the funeral flowers had wilted. Instead, I asked quietly, if I lost everything tomorrow, would your family still call me their son? She froze. The question lingered between us. After nearly a minute, she whispered, why would you even ask that? Because I already knew the answer. I opened the car door. We should go home. The drive was silent. Streetlights reflected across the windshield like broken pieces of another lifetime. Evelyn kept checking her phone. Jason, her mother, her uncle. The family group chat was exploding. I didn't need to read the messages. I remember them almost word for word. How could Ethan refuse? He's changed. Money matters more to him now. He's abandoning us. In my previous life, those accusations had broken me. Tonight, they sounded strangely distant. My phone rang again. This time, it was an unfamiliar number. Mr. Cole, speaking. My name is Daniel Brooks. The name made my hands tighten around the steering wheel. Daniel. In my previous life, we had met 4 years later. By then, his investment firm had become one of the largest logistics companies in the country. I'd once joked that if we'd met earlier, my company might have survived. Instead, we never had the chance. I'm sorry to bother you, Daniel continued. A mutual acquaintance recommended your manufacturing software. My heartbeat slowed. This call wasn't supposed to happen yet. I'll be in the city tomorrow, he said. Would you be interested in meeting? I glanced at Evelyn. She was still reading furious messages from her family. Yes, I answered. I'd like that. After hanging up, I couldn't stop thinking. The future wasn't fixed. Some events remained the same. Others had already begun to change. Perhaps refusing the first loan had shifted more than I'd expected. When we reached home, Evelyn stepped out without waiting for me. She didn't say goodnight. She disappeared into the bedroom and locked the door. I remained in the living room. The apartment felt unfamiliar. Not because anything had changed, because I finally saw it clearly. Almost every expensive item had been purchased after I took another loan. the imported sofa, the designer dining table, the luxury television Jason had convinced Evelyn to borrow temporarily. Nothing had ever truly belonged to us. It had all been bought with tomorrow's peace. My phone buzzed once more. A security report from the bank. Attempted login blocked. Location: Riverside Hotel Business Center. I stared at the address. I remembered it. Jason always met his private lenders there. Except, this attempt had happened tonight. Hours earlier than before. Someone was becoming desperate, and desperate people made mistakes. The next morning, I arrived at the office before sunrise. The lobby lights were still dim. Cleaning staff moved quietly through the halls while the city outside slowly woke. For the first time in years, I wasn't exhausted. Not because life had become easier, because I had stopped carrying burdens that had never belonged to me. "Morning, Mr. Cole." My assistant, Nina, hurried toward me with a tablet in her hands. "You have 3 urgent requests." "Go ahead." "Your wife called twice." I nodded without speaking. "Your brother-in-law emailed asking for an emergency meeting." "Decline it." She blinked. "Without rescheduling?" "Without rescheduling." She made a note. The 3rd. Her expression became uncertain. "Someone sent flowers." "Flowers?" She pointed toward my office. A simple arrangement of white lilies rested on my desk. No card, only a small envelope. Inside was a single handwritten sentence. "The people you save decide your future. Choose carefully." No signature. No explanation. The handwriting was unfamiliar. I turned the card over. Blank. "Nina." "Yes." "Did security record who delivered this?" "They wore a courier uniform." I nodded slowly. "Save the camera footage." "Of course." Before I could think further, my office phone rang. "Daniel Brooks." "Good morning. I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all. I've reviewed your company's public reports." He paused. "I think we're both solving the same manufacturing problem." His directness surprised me. In my previous life, Daniel had built his empire because no one listened to his ideas early enough. This time, perhaps we both had another chance. "I'd like to invest," he said. "Not today. Eventually. But first, I want to know if you're as trustworthy as people claim." I smiled faintly. "That's an unusual interview." "So is life." We agreed to meet that afternoon. As I ended the call, the office doors burst open. Evelyn walked in. Her face was pale. Her eyes were swollen from another sleepless night. "You blocked Jason." "Yes." "You froze your company's credit." "Yes." She stopped in front of my desk. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" "I assumed you would." She clenched her fists. "Everyone says you're abandoning us." I looked at her quietly. "What do you think?" Her lips parted, then closed again. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know anymore." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she reached in her purse and placed a folder on my desk. "I found this in Jason's apartment." I frowned. "What is it?" "I wasn't looking for it." Her voice shook. "It fell behind his desk." I opened the folder. Inside were dozens of loan contracts. Some were signed. Some weren't. Several contained forged signatures. Then, I found mine. Perfectly copied. Page after page. The room suddenly became silent. Evelyn covered her mouth. I compared them. "They're fake." She looked as though the realization itself was breaking something inside her. I confronted Jason. "What did he say?" He laughed. Her eyes filled with tears. "He said family shouldn't care about paperwork." I closed the folder carefully. In my previous life, I had never seen this evidence. Jason had destroyed it before anyone else discovered the truth. Now, his first mistake had already surfaced. Evelyn looked at me with trembling eyes. "Tell me honestly, how long have you known?" I met her gaze. Long enough to know that telling the truth about my second life would solve nothing. So I answered the only way I could. "I've known that trust can be forged just as easily as a signature." A knock interrupted us. Nina opened the door cautiously. "Mr. Cole, there are 2 detectives downstairs. They'd like to speak with you." Behind her, through the office's glass wall, I saw them enter the lobby. One carried a thin evidence box. The other held a sealed warrant envelope. And both were walking straight toward my office. The detectives didn't waste time with introductions. A quiet knock. The door opened. 2 men in dark suits stepped inside, their polished shoes barely making a sound against the hardwood floor. The older detective held up his badge. "Mr. Ethan Cole?" "Yes. I'm Detective Marcus Hale. This is Detective Ian Foster." I stood. "Please have a seat." Neither of them sat. Detective Hale placed the evidence box carefully on my desk. "We're investigating a series of commercial loan fraud cases." Evelyn's face immediately lost what little color remained. The detective noticed. "Mrs. Cole." She nodded silently. Hale continued. "Your names appeared during a financial review." He slid several documents toward me. The moment I saw the signatures, I recognized them. Not because they were mine, because they were the same forged signatures that had ruined my previous life. Only this time, someone else had discovered them before the banks completed their investigations. "These aren't mine," I said calmly. "We know." Evelyn looked at me in surprise. "You knew?" I didn't answer. Hale opened the evidence box. Inside were dozens of original loan files, photographs, bank transfer records, digital authorization logs. "We've already had a handwriting expert examine them." He tapped one report. "Every forged signature points to the same person." He looked directly at me. "Jason Cole requested your digital certificates several months ago." I frowned. "Jason Shun." The detective checked his notes. "My apologies. Jason Shun." He continued. "He claimed you had given him permission to help manage emergency financing." Evelyn's breathing became uneven. I remember." Both detectives turned toward her. She slowly lowered herself into the chair. "Last year." She swallowed hard. "Jason borrowed Ethan's laptop." Her voice grew quieter. "He said he wanted to print family photos." I closed my eyes. That had happened. I remembered laughing when Jason accidentally spilled coffee beside my desk. I remembered leaving the room to grab towels. When I returned, he had already cleaned everything. I never questioned it. Now, the missing 10 minutes finally made sense. Detective Foster nodded. "That was likely when he copied your authentication files." Silence filled the office. Every unanswered question from my previous life slowly began connecting together. The fake guarantees, the impossible approvals, the loans I supposedly authorized while attending overseas conferences. Someone hadn't merely used my kindness. They had built an entire financial scheme around my identity. Evelyn suddenly burst into tears. "Oh God." She covered her face. "I'm the one who let him borrow it." "No." I knelt beside her chair. "You trusted your brother." She shook her head violently. "I trusted the wrong person." The words sounded painfully sincere. For the first time since my return, I saw genuine regret instead of obligation. Detective Hale quietly interrupted. "Mr. Cole, there is another matter." He removed a flash drive from the evidence box. "This contains surveillance footage from Riverside Hotel." My heartbeat slowed. The Riverside Hotel. The same location where the bank had blocked the unauthorized login. Hale connected the drive to my office computer. Security footage appeared. Timestamp: 8:43 p.m. Yesterday, Jason entered a private business lounge. He wasn't alone. 3 men in tailored suits greeted him. One placed a thick envelope on the table. Another opened a laptop. Then, the screen zoomed. The software sharpened the image. My company logo appeared on their monitor. So did my digital signature. Jason smiled. He pointed toward a document. Even without audio, I already knew what he was saying. "Use Ethan's company." The detective paused the footage. "We arrested one of these men early this morning. He's cooperating." "What did he say?" Hale looked directly into my eyes. "He said your brother-in-law promised investors that if anything went wrong, you would pay everything." The room became completely still. Not because the accusation shocked me, because it confirmed something I had never proven in my previous life. Jason had never expected to repay a single dollar. I wasn't his backup plan. I was the entire business model. An hour later, the detectives left with copies of every forged document Evelyn had found. Before leaving, Hale stopped beside the elevator. "One piece of advice." I waited. Fraud investigations move slowly, but desperate people move fast. Be careful. The elevator doors closed. I stood alone in the hallway. Evelyn quietly approached behind me. "I never asked you." I turned. Why you suddenly stopped saving us. The question lingered between us. I almost answered, because I had already buried myself once. Instead, I smiled faintly, because sometimes the kindest thing you can do is refuse. She lowered her head. For the first time, she didn't argue. That afternoon, I met Daniel Brooks. Unlike every executive I'd known, he arrived without an assistant, without bodyguards, without unnecessary confidence. He wore a simple navy suit and carried his own briefcase. You must be Ethan, and you must be Daniel. We shook hands. His grip was firm, his eyes observant. He noticed everything. The untouched coffee, the stress lines beneath my eyes, the unopened lunch on my desk. You've had an interesting morning. You could say that. He smiled. I almost canceled. Why didn't you? Because people reveal themselves under pressure. He sat. I wanted to see which version of Ethan Cole would walk into this room. Daniel opened his briefcase and placed a thin folder on the conference table. Unlike Jason's glossy investment proposals, this one contained only financial statements, engineering sketches, and handwritten notes. No exaggerated promises. No impossible projections. I don't sell dreams, Daniel said. I solve expensive problems. I flipped through the pages. His logistic software was years ahead of anything currently available. In my previous life, companies had fought to invest in him. Now, almost no one believed in the idea. Why bring this to me? I asked. He leaned back. Because every bank I approached cared more about collateral than competence. A bitter smile crossed his face. I heard you refused to guarantee someone else's debt. I looked up. News travels quickly. It does in financial circles. He folded his hands. People are calling you cold. I waited. They're wrong. His words surprised me. They're calling a boundary cruelty because they're accustomed to benefiting from your generosity. For a brief moment, it felt as though he understood a life I'd never told anyone about. I don't know your family, Daniel continued, but I know numbers, and numbers tell stories. He tapped one of my company's reports. For years, your profits increased, but your personal liquidity disappeared. You weren't investing in yourself. You were rescuing someone. I smiled faintly. You're very observant. No. He closed the folder. I've simply seen too many good people bankrupt themselves trying to become someone else's safety net. The meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. Not once did he ask me to invest. Not once did he pressure me. Instead, we discussed manufacturing, automation, and long-term strategy. For the first time since returning to the past, I spoke about the future instead of surviving the present. As Daniel stood to leave, he extended his hand again. When your personal storm settles, I'd like us to build something together. I'd like that too. That evening, I returned home. The apartment was unusually quiet. Evelyn sat alone in the dining room. No television, no music, only a thick envelope lying in front of her. She looked exhausted. My parents came. I placed my keys on the table. What did they want? They wanted me to convince you to withdraw your statement. I remained silent. She pushed the envelope toward me. They left these. Inside were property deeds, insurance policies, old bank books, every remaining family asset. They want you to use these as collateral instead. I slowly closed the envelope. No. She looked at me in confusion. They're finally offering everything they have. They should have offered it before asking for yours. Tears welled in her eyes again. I think they're frightened. So am I. She stared at me. You? I spent years afraid. Afraid that if I stopped saving everyone, there would be nothing left of our family. I took a slow breath. I've realized something. They weren't asking me to protect the family. They were asking me to protect them from the consequences of their own decisions. A long silence followed. Then Evelyn quietly nodded. I understand now. It was the first time she had ever said those words without asking me to sacrifice something afterward. My phone buzzed. Detective Hale. I answered immediately. Mr. Cole. His voice was tense. We've executed search warrants at 3 locations. What did you find? A storage locker. What was inside? He paused. Boxes. Hundreds of original financial records. And 1 notebook. What notebook? The notebook contains names. My chest tightened. Whose names? Every person Jason planned to use as future guarantors. Another pause. Your name is only the first on the list. The room suddenly felt colder. Jason hadn't been running from death. He had been building an entire chain of victims. And somewhere on that list were people who still had no idea what was coming. The notebook lay in an evidence bag when Detective Hale placed it on the conference table. We thought you should see this before tomorrow. The police station smelled of stale coffee and damp paper. Outside the interview room, officers hurried through narrow hallways carrying stacks of files. Inside, everything was painfully quiet. Hale carefully opened the evidence bag. The notebook itself was ordinary. Black leather, worn edges, no title, yet I remembered it. Not because I had seen it before, because I had unknowingly lived inside its pages. Hale turned to the first handwritten list. Every name had a number beside it. Investment capacity, credit rating, available assets, emotional weakness. My breathing slowed. This wasn't a desperate man's notes. It was a hunter's ledger. My own name appeared at the top. Ethan Cole, business owner, reliable, will never refuse Evelyn. Beside it, a single sentence, unlimited until bankruptcy. For several seconds, I couldn't hear anything. The room disappeared. The fluorescent lights, the detectives, even my own breathing. Unlimited until bankruptcy. That was exactly how my previous life had ended. Not because Jason had hated me, because he'd calculated me. Detective Foster quietly broke the silence. There are 37 names. He flipped another page. Teachers, retired couples, small business owners, a widowed pharmacist, even an old family friend. Everyone had been categorized. Everyone had a weakness. Some trusted Jason. Others trusted my father-in-law. Many trusted me, because if Ethan Cole guaranteed something, people believed it was safe. I slowly closed the notebook. This wasn't borrowing. No. Hale nodded. It was recruitment. An hour later, the investigation team assembled in a larger conference room. Financial crime specialists, bank representatives, digital forensics. Each department displayed another piece of Jason's network. Projected onto the screen was a flowchart. It looked less like family debt and more like an organized financial operation. Money entered through fake logistics companies, moved through shell corporations, returned as private investments. When lenders demanded repayment, new guarantors replaced old ones. The cycle continued until no one remained. One investigator circled the company name, Blue Horizon Holdings. I recognized it immediately. In my previous life, Blue Horizon had collapsed just 2 weeks before my bankruptcy. Back then, everyone believed the market had turned. Now, I finally knew the truth. It had never been a market failure. It had been Jason pulling money out before the collapse. Detective Hale looked toward me. Do you know this company? I guaranteed one of their suppliers. He nodded grimly. That supplier never existed. Every answer created another wound. Every memory became clearer. Every sacrifice had been planned long before I ever signed. Suddenly, an officer hurried into the room. Detective. Hale stood immediately. What happened? We found him. The room became silent. Jason. The officer nodded. He surrendered. The interrogation room was separated by thick, reinforced glass. Jason sat calmly on the other side. No panic. No anger. He even straightened his tie before Hale entered. I watched from the observation room. Jason smiled. I wondered how long it would take. Hale remained standing. You know why you're here? I have a few guesses. The detective placed the notebook on the table. Jason looked down. His smile disappeared. Only for a second. Then it returned. So you found that. No explanation? Jason shrugged. I like planning. You forged signatures. I optimized trust. You stole millions. I borrowed opportunities. The detective's patience finally cracked. You ruined families. Jason leaned forward. No, they ruined themselves. They wanted impossible returns. They signed papers without reading. They trusted emotions over contracts. He laughed softly. I simply understood human nature. Watching him, I finally understood something myself. Jason didn't believe he'd done anything wrong. Not truly. To him, people weren't victims. They were resources. Hale slid another document across the table. We recovered your offshore account records. Jason glanced at them once, then looked away. So, the balances match every fraudulent transfer. Jason sighed. I suppose this is the part where I'm shocked. The detective didn't respond. Instead, he played a recording. Jason's own voice filled the room. If Ethan refuses, we'll use his digital authorization anyway. If everything fails, he'll be too guilty to let Evelyn suffer. Jason slowly closed his eyes. For the first time, his confidence wavered. Only slightly, but enough. Outside the glass, I stood motionless. I didn't feel victorious, only tired, because the man who had destroyed my previous life had never even considered me a brother, only a financial strategy. News spread before sunrise. Every financial network carried the same headline. Major loan fraud investigation leads to multiple arrests. Television stations camped outside the courthouse. Reporters crowded every entrance. Investors demanded explanations. Banks began reviewing thousands of suspicious transactions. Within hours, Blue Horizon Holdings filed for emergency bankruptcy protection. By noon, 3 associated shell companies ceased operations. By evening, lenders froze dozens of connected accounts. The network that had taken years to build began collapsing in a single day. Not because I exposed it, because once one lie broke, the rest could no longer support each other. My phone rang continuously. Unknown numbers, former business partners, journalists. I ignored them all. Only one call mattered. Detective Hale, we've finished tracing the funds. And you weren't the only intended guarantor. I know, there were already 11 victims. My chest tightened. How many lost everything? 4. The answer lingered heavily between us. For lives, for families, for futures. If I hadn't returned, there would have been 12, mine included. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. My father-in-law. He stood outside my office holding nothing except an old umbrella. He looked 10 years older than he had only weeks earlier. I won't stay long. I invited him inside. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, he bowed. Not a polite nod. A deep, complete apology. I'm ashamed. His voice trembled. I kept asking what you could give. I never asked what we were taking. I quietly poured 2 cups of tea. He didn't touch his. I blamed you. I called you selfish. I told everyone you abandoned us. His eyes reddened. But the truth was that we abandoned you first. I remained silent. There was nothing cruel left to say, nothing necessary to prove. After a long pause, he reached into his coat and placed a small wooden box on my desk. Inside rested the family seal, the symbol passed down through 3 generations. I can't ask you to forgive us. I don't. His shoulders sank. I know, but this no longer belongs to me. He pushed the box toward me. It belongs to the only person who protected this family, even after we stopped deserving it. I gently closed the lid, then slid it back across the desk. No. He looked confused. It's still your family. I don't need a symbol. I only needed the truth. His eyes filled with tears. This time, there was no manipulation in them, only grief. He stood slowly. As he reached the door, he stopped. Ethan, yes. I used to think strength meant carrying everyone. He lowered his head. Now I understand. Strength is knowing when to put the burden down. The door closed softly behind him. I remained alone in the office. The afternoon sunlight stretched across the floor. For the first time since returning to the past, I felt something unfamiliar. Not relief, not satisfaction, peace. My assistant knocked gently. Mr. Cole, yes. Mr. Brooks is here. Daniel entered carrying 2 folders. He smiled. I heard the storm is ending. I returned the smile. No. I looked out across the city skyline. It's finally clearing. The city looked different after the headlines faded. Not because the buildings had changed, because I no longer searched every street for the next crisis. 3 weeks passed. For the first time in years, my phone didn't ring at midnight with another emergency. No frantic requests. No impossible promises. No one asking me to save them from decisions they had made themselves. Instead, there was work, real work, the kind that built something instead of merely delaying collapse. Daniel and I stood on the empty factory floor that would soon become our first automated production center. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, illuminating rows of silent machinery waiting to be installed. Daniel folded the blueprint. "What do you think?" I walked slowly across the polished concrete. "I think." My voice echoed through the enormous building. "It's strange." "What is?" "I spent years paying for other people's futures." I smiled faintly. I almost forgot what it feels like to build my own. Daniel laughed quietly. "Then let's make up for lost time." Construction began the following Monday. Unlike my previous life, every contract was reviewed personally. Every supplier underwent background checks. Every investment required unanimous approval. Some executives complained that I had become overly cautious. I accepted the criticism without argument. Experience had taught me that trust should be earned slowly, not given freely. One afternoon, Nina entered my office carrying a thin folder. "You have another visitor." "Reporter?" She shook her head. "No." She hesitated. "It's your wife." I remained silent. Should I send her away? After a long moment, I answered, "No. Let her come in." Evelyn stepped inside quietly. She looked different, not because of her clothes, because the exhaustion had finally settled into acceptance. She placed a small cardboard box on my desk. "I found these while packing." Inside were old photographs, a concert ticket, a faded receipt from our first apartment, a cheap keychain shaped like a paper crane. Objects from a life that had existed before debt became the center of every conversation. "I thought you might want them." I picked up the keychain. The metal was scratched from years of use. "You kept this." She smiled sadly. "You gave it to me when we couldn't afford anything else." Silence lingered between us. Not uncomfortable, just honest. Finally, she spoke. "I've been seeing a counselor." I looked up. They asked me one question. "What was it?" She lowered her eyes. "When did helping your family become more important than protecting your marriage?" She laughed bitterly. I couldn't answer. I slowly returned the keychain to the box. "You don't have to." She nodded. "I know." Another silence. Then she looked directly at me. "I don't expect another chance. I came because—" Her voice caught. "I want to say thank you." I frowned slightly. "For what?" "For refusing." The word surprised me. "If you had signed those loans again." She took a slow breath. "I would have spent the rest of my life believing my brother deserved saving more than you deserve protecting." Tears filled her eyes. "You forced me to see the truth." I didn't answer immediately. Some apologies couldn't erase the past, but sincere regret deserved respect. "I hope you heal," I said quietly. She nodded. "I hope you do too." She turned toward the door. Before leaving, she stopped. "I filed for divorce yesterday." I remained still. "I thought you should hear it from me." The door closed gently behind her. I looked at the small cardboard box for a long time, not mourning what ended, appreciating what had once been genuine before fear and obligation consumed it. Sometimes, the healthiest ending wasn't reconciliation. It was acceptance. That evening, Daniel found me alone on the factory roof overlooking the city. "You've been up here for almost an hour." I needed the quiet. He handed me a cup of coffee. "Bad day." I looked at the skyline. "No, just a meaningful one." He nodded as though he understood without asking. "You know," he leaned against the railing. "When people survive something difficult, they usually ask why it happened." I looked toward him. "I think that's the wrong question. What should they ask instead?" He smiled. "What can I build now that I'm finally free?" The wind carried his words across the rooftop. For the first time, the future didn't feel like something to fear. It felt like something waiting to be created. 6 months later, the factory officially opened. Employees filled the production floor. Machines hummed in perfect rhythm. Large display screens tracked output, quality, and efficiency in real time. The first shipment rolled off the assembly line just after 10 in the morning. Applause echoed through the building. I watched quietly from the observation platform. Nina walked over with a tablet. First day production exceeded projections by 12%. Daniel grinned. "I'll pretend I expected that." "You didn't." "I absolutely didn't." We laughed together. It was a simple moment. But after everything that had happened, it felt extraordinary. The company grew steadily. Not explosively. Not recklessly. Steadily, that became our philosophy. Growth without shortcuts. Success without borrowed futures. Several former clients returned after learning the truth behind the fraud investigation. Others apologized for believing the rumors. I accepted their business. I didn't ask for apologies. Consequences had already taught everyone the lessons words never could. One afternoon, Detective Hale visited the office carrying no file for the first time. "Civilian clothes suit you," I joked. "They're more comfortable." He smiled. "The trial is over." I already knew the verdict, but hearing it still mattered. Jason Shun received a lengthy prison sentence for fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and financial crimes. I nodded quietly. "And the others?" "Most accepted plea agreements." He paused. There was something else. He handed me an envelope. Inside were letters from several families whose names had appeared in Jason's notebook. One by one, I opened them. Some were handwritten, others typed. Each expressed gratitude, not because I had personally saved them, because refusing to become another victim had exposed the system before it trapped them too. The final letter came from an elderly widow. It contained only one sentence. "Because you finally said no, my grandson still has a home." I closed my eyes. In my previous life, I believed saying no meant abandoning people. Now, I understood that sometimes no prevented far greater suffering. That evening, I visited my father's grave. The cemetery was quiet beneath the golden light of sunset. I placed fresh white lilies beside the headstone. "I'm late," I said softly. "I know." A gentle breeze moved through the trees. "I spent years trying to become someone you would be proud of." I smiled. "I think I'm misunderstood. I thought being dependable meant carrying everyone's burdens." I looked at the engraved name. "It doesn't. It means carrying your own responsibilities honestly and allowing others to carry theirs." For a long time, I simply stood there. No anger, no resentment, only gratitude. Gratitude for the impossible second life that had given me one final opportunity to choose differently. As I turned to leave, my phone vibrated. Daniel had sent a single message. "Ready for tomorrow's expansion meeting?" I smiled and typed back. More than ever, I slipped the phone into my pocket and walked down the quiet cemetery path. This time, I wasn't walking away from responsibility. I was walking toward a life built on truth instead of sacrifice. The courthouse plaza was quieter than I remembered, not because fewer people had gathered, because this time I wasn't standing among creditors waiting for my name to be called. I stood beneath the broad stone steps as an invited witness, watching reporters dismantle their cameras after the final sentencing. The trial had ended 3 days earlier. Today, the last remaining civil settlements were being signed. The chapter that had consumed 2 lives, one I had lost and one I had been given back, was finally closing. "Mr. Cole." I turned. Detective Hale extended a thick envelope. "Everything recovered that legally belongs to you." I accepted it without opening it. I heard some victims receive compensation. They did. Not everything they lost. His voice remained steady, but enough to begin again. That was all anyone could ask. Justice couldn't erase pain. It could only stop new pain from spreading. As Hale prepared to leave, he hesitated. "I've investigated financial crimes for 22 years. I waited. Most victims spend the rest of their lives asking why someone betrayed them." He looked directly at me. "You never did." I smiled faintly. "I spent enough time asking that question once. And now, I ask a different one. What kind? What kind of person do I become after surviving it?" Hale nodded. "I think you found your answer." He walked away without another word. Instead of returning to the office, I drove toward the old apartment building where Evelyn and I had once lived. The landlord had renovated the entrance. The faded mailboxes were gone. Fresh paint covered the cracked walls. Children laughed in the courtyard. Life had continued. I stood outside apartment 7B for several minutes before knocking. An elderly couple answered. "Can we help you?" I smiled politely. "I'm sorry. I used to live here." The old man laughed warmly. "You're welcome to look." The apartment was completely different. New furniture, different colors, different memories. Yet standing inside, I could almost see another version of myself sitting at the dining table surrounded by loan documents. Sleepless, terrified, convinced that sacrificing one more piece of himself would somehow save everyone. I quietly whispered, "I'm sorry," not to the new owners, to the man I had once been, the man who believed his worth depended on how much pain he could carry. When I stepped back outside, it felt as though I had finally left him behind. A week later, Daniel invited the entire management team to the company's annual strategy retreat. Unlike the extravagant corporate events I'd attended in my previous life, this gathering was held at a quiet mountain lodge. No luxury, no performances, just honest conversations. On the second evening, Daniel surprised everyone. He placed a blank sheet of paper in front of each executive. "I have one question." No presentation followed. No financial charts. Only the question, will you never sacrifice again? The room became silent. One by one, people answered. My health, my children's birthdays, my integrity, my friendships. When it became my turn, I stared at the empty page for a long time. Finally, I wrote only one sentence. "I will never mistake guilt for responsibility again." Daniel read it, then folded the paper without another comment. He didn't need to say anything. The sentence had taken 2 lifetimes to write. Several months later, the company celebrated its largest international contract. Employees gathered in the production hall. Applause echoed through the building. Nina raised a glass. "To new beginnings." Everyone cheered. I looked across the crowd. No one there owed their future to impossible debt. No one had been manipulated into carrying another person's choices. The success belonged to every individual who had earned it honestly. For the first time, victory didn't feel loud. It felt peaceful. Spring arrived quietly. Cherry blossoms lined the riverside park where I often walked before work. One morning, I noticed someone sitting alone on a familiar bench. Evelyn. She looked healthier than I had seen her in years. The constant anxiety that once lived in her eyes had finally faded. She noticed me and smiled gently. "Good morning." "Morning." Neither of us seemed surprised, almost as though we'd both known this meeting would happen someday. "Would you like to sit?" I did. For several minutes, we simply watched petals drift across the river. Finally, she spoke. "I started volunteering." "Really?" She nodded. "Families recovering from financial abuse." I looked at her with quiet surprise. "I can't change what happened." She smiled sadly. "But maybe I can recognize the signs before someone else loses everything." I nodded. "That's meaningful work." She laughed softly. "I learned it from someone." We both knew who she meant. She stood. "I won't keep you." As she turned to leave, she stopped. "Ethan." "Yes." "I'm glad you walked away." The words settled gently between us. No bitterness. No longing. Only acceptance. "I am too," I replied. She smiled one last time before disappearing into the crowd. It wasn't a reunion. It didn't need to be. Some people belonged in your future. Others belonged in the lesson that allowed you to reach it. Years passed. Our company became an industry leader not because we chased impossible growth, but because we refused to build success on borrowed trust. Daniel eventually framed the very first factory blueprint and hung it in the headquarters lobby. Beneath it, he placed a small plaque, "Built without compromising tomorrow." Employees often paused to read it. Few knew the story behind those words. I always smile when I walk past. They weren't just about business. They were about life. On the anniversary of my father's passing, I visited his grave once more. The morning air carried the scent of fresh rain. I placed white lilies beside the stone and stood quietly. I finally understand. The wind rustled through the trees. I couldn't save everyone. I was never supposed to. I only needed the courage to stop losing myself while trying. Sunlight broke through the clouds, warming the granite before me. I closed my eyes. In another lifetime, this journey had ended beneath unbearable debt, endless regret, and a heart that simply gave out. In this life, it ended with purpose, with honest work, with friendships built on respect, with peace earned one difficult decision at a time. As I turned and walked toward the cemetery gate, I never looked back, not because the past no longer mattered, but because it had already given me the only gift I truly needed: the wisdom to recognize that the greatest act of courage was never carrying every burden. It was knowing which ones were never yours to bear.